Welcome to episode 23 of the Tax Professionals podcast. In this episode, we covered the benefits of having your very own tax specialism or niche, as well as tips to help you choose your own, with this episode's guest, Sofia Thomas.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Choosing your own tax specialism can seem like a daunting task. Perhaps you're worried that having a specialism will restrict your future opportunities or feel like you'd rather be a tax generalist. I remember feeling like this. My first tax job straight out of university was in employment tax and primarily focused on work within the recruitment sector. At the time, I felt like this was too niche and may restrict my career opportunities. I like the sound of experiencing different taxes, wondering whether I prefer working in a different tax area such as corporation tax, personal tax or VAT. It was only when choosing my final CTA exams that I really had decided that I was going to stick to employment taxes and accepting that this was actually a good thing that is beneficial to my career. But up until this point I did spend a lot of time not feeling sure on what to do. I've spoken to other people too who felt the same way, so I'm sure there's many others that are going through or have gone through the same thing too. That's why I'm really looking forward to sharing this episode with you, where I speak to Sofia Thomas, who specialises solely in tax on divorce. Sofia has a very own successful tax business which specialises solely in undertaking work in tax on divorce, and she is a great example of how beneficial having a tax niche really is. In the episode, she explains her story, the opportunities that having a tax specialism has given her, and why she is for having a tax niche. She also provides her unique but interesting approach to choosing a specialism that's right for you, and towards the end she provides some steps which you can take if you're thinking about starting your own business. But just before we jump into it, if you enjoyed the episode, you can make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes which will benefit you and your career by subscribing or signing up to email notifications by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. Without further ado, let's get to it. So thank you for joining me today, Sofia, and welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast. It's really good to have you here. Just to start off the episode a bit today, could you just tell us a little bit about you, your tax career, and maybe covering some points like why you started in tax, where you are now, your journey, and how you're involved in the tax community?
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I listen to it regularly, so I'm really delighted to be featured on it today. I started my career in tax when I was quite young. So I started at PwC when I was 20. I didn't do a degree, so I just went straight in on their Head Start program where you study and you do your tax qualifications, but you don't have to have a degree to be on the course. And then from there, I moved on to Citibank, which is where I worked in sort of the share schemes and managing those. And then after a year and a half at Citi, I then set up my own practice. So my practice is just finishing its fourth year now, and we're about to head into our fifth year. I would say that I'm relatively involved in the tax community. I'm a member of the tax panel for the Association of Accounting, the AAT, Association of Accounting Technicians, I think. And then I'm on the tax panel for the tax steering group with ATT. And I've spoken at the CIOT conferences, STEP conferences, and write several articles. So relatively enjoy being in the tax world and try and get as much out of it as I can.
Yeah, I think you're quite involved. I think even before we connected on LinkedIn, I saw articles cropping up that you'd written and events that you'd been involved in. So you give a lot back to the community, which is a nice thing to do. With your business then, that you've started, could you just tell us a little bit about, I suppose, the tax services that you provide through that and your specialism, which I think is really unique? Do you mind just starting off by telling us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So my business we're a small tax consultancy firm, and we just provide tax advice for clients who are going through divorce or separation. So we primarily work with family law firms or barristers, and we provide the tax implications on the breakdown of the marriage or separation. And that usually takes the form of doing reports for the court, so a single joint expert report, and that's where the family court will appoint you as the expert, and you are completely independent of both parties, and you're just providing the tax tax answers of various scenarios. But we'll also work with individuals who might have historical tax liabilities, and they need to know their position as they head into the divorce process. They need to understand how much tax they might need to pay, what they need to earmark or set aside. And then we'll also look at the future implications. So if somebody is going to be receiving properties, is there going to be tax on that, and what is the potential CGT that they're taking on, or what's the CGT going to be payable in the future?
Yeah, I think it sounds like a really interesting specialism to have. You did mention earlier that you also did some work on share schemes earlier on in your career. So what made you actually decide to, I suppose, specialise in tax on divorce as opposed to something else?
Yeah, so when I left Citibank, it was because I found the hours were too long for me. It was really intense. And I thought, if I'm going to be working this long, I'll just rather be working for myself. And so when I originally set up, I did have more of a general tax practice. And then my friend was actually going through a separation. And she asked me to just review the documents. And I looked at it and I said, oh, well, your partner's getting the main home, you're getting investment properties, so you need to take off 28%, blah, blah, blah. And then I said to her, just go and find somebody who does this work, and they'll be able to give you better advice because it will be their area of expertise. And after a lot of Googling, she found that she couldn't find somebody that did it. And so that kind of got me interested in thinking, oh, is this an area that is, does it need, is there an opportunity for a tax advisor to be working in this area of the market? So that is where it started. And then I spent about a year continuing my general practice, and I went to loads of family law conferences. I watched loads of recordings and webinars. I read family law books just to try and understand, okay, how does the divorce process work? Do they really need to be considering tax? Is there any point of me pursuing this any further? And through that found that, yes, after my year of doing that research, I thought, yeah, there is probably a small gap in the market that I might be able to provide some advice and to help individuals with. And so that's when I started specialising.
And it sounds like then it has been a worthwhile niche to pursue. I mean, how have you found it in terms of, I suppose, getting work, comparing to when you had that general practice instead, when you were probably going out there and just trying to sell a more general tax service? How have you found like the difference with having, I suppose, your specialism now being tax on divorce?
I really prefer it. I think it's allowed me to be really specific about the things that I need to do my research on, the courses I need to attend. Like, I know I don't need to learn about, the emissions treatment of company cars, for example, because that's never going to come up in my day-to-day practice.
Yeah.
So it allows me to be really specific with what I'm learning, because as you know, you've constantly got to be reading and researching. So that helps. And then it also helps me with things such as if I'm developing products for clients, or if I'm developing when you're developing your website and writing about what it is that you can offer, I can be really specific with the value that I can offer, because I'm only working in a very small sector of the market. So I don't need to use general terms, which I think people find it really hard to relate to when you just generally say, this is how I can help. But when you have a specialism, you can be really specific about the ways that you can help and support clients and what their life will look like, post the advice and the reports that you're delivering. So it's been really helpful in allowing me to hone in my own services, and then also be really clear about what it is that I offer, which I think makes clients feel more comfortable when they're choosing an advisor.
Do you feel like that also makes it easier to bring on board new clients and get repeat customers, since you are so clear and specific on what you offer and the value that can bring to someone?
Yeah, I mean, you don't get many repeat clients when you do tax on divorce work, because most people, they of course you can get people that have multiple divorces, but primarily it's if I've worked with a law firm, they will usually then want to work with me again, and that's really positive. And I spend a lot of time trying to understand the problem from their perspective, so trying to understand the process from form E all the way to the first directions hearing, so that then when they use that language to me, I immediately know what they're talking about, and they don't have to convert it into English for me, and then I have to take the tax and convert it back to them. And I think that they really appreciate that. And that's something you can't do if you're a generalist. You can't learn everybody's industry inside out and then relay it. It's just too much work. But being specialist means that I can invest that time doing that.
Yeah, no, they're really good points. I mean, if anyone just looks at the amount of legislation there is nowadays, I mean, could you imagine trying to learn all of that and give good advice? It'd be almost impossible, wouldn't it? So really focusing down. Go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say I completely agree with you. I'm very specific about what I do and what I don't do. And it allows me to also, you run your own business, the risk is huge, of course, because you're the final person who reads the advice before it goes out. And so being able to ignore certain bits of the legislation, because I know it's not going to be relevant for me, that's really helpful. I've just signed on to the CIOT's conference, and I think most of those sessions are relevant to me, but I've already picked out 2 that I won't need to attend. And it's things like that. It just makes, I think, life a bit clearer, certainly business life a bit clearer, of like, well, what do I need to know? What do I need to be taking on board? And what can I just say, okay, that might be somewhat interesting, but you can just put it to one side.
Yeah. So really it allows you to be more, I suppose, effective with your use of time, because you're not having to keep researching new things. You know exactly what you need to know. Yeah, you can rule out those kind of sessions that you said aren't going to be useful for you. So I suppose it means that you can really focus in on your time then. And does it also mean that you can charge probably a more premium fee, since you've got such a set specialism, and you can probably work quicker than you would have if you were more general?
Yeah, I don't know how my fees, the fee thing is interesting, of course, because you have small firms and massive firms. I certainly feel comfortable with the rates that I'm charging, and I would say that they are high in comparison to potentially if I was a general tax advisor. And it does mean I can do the work more efficiently, and it means that if I have an hour's call with some solicitors or a couple getting divorced, I have most of the information at the top of my head, because this is all I do day in, day out. So not only do I know if they've got a business, all the different ways that they might want to split it, or what's most common practice when couples are getting divorced versus long marriage versus short marriage. All of that information is just at the front of my mind. So we can get quite a lot out of an hour. And I think that that's really helpful for clients.
I have no doubt that probably the value that you provide, niching as opposed to being more general, is going to be much better within a short period of time. So yeah, it's good that you've kind of, I suppose, got the same experience, because it's similar for me really with employment taxes. So I specialize in employment taxes, but I have a more defined specialism within the recruitment sector, because that's the sector that I do about 90% of my work in. And so whenever I'm doing work on the recruitment sector, it is so much easier in a way, because I don't have to keep researching the rules over and over again. I know exactly what's relevant to them, what's affecting other clients. But then for that other 10% of work that's outside of that, it does feel like a bigger task almost to do that, because you have to go back and make sure that you understand the rules and that you've got it correct. And kind of, as you've mentioned, you need a second review really for those. So when you're doing work by yourself without others, having that specialism, I suppose, allows you to be more confident that you've got the answer right, whereas you could be a little bit less so if it was more general.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Yeah.
Just before we move on to kind of, if you think there's any cons to specialising and having a niche, do you think you would be in the same position with your general practice as opposed to your tax on divorce practice? Or do you think having that specialism has helped you get to a better position than you would have otherwise?
Oh, for me, it's absolutely helped me get into a better position than I would have been otherwise. I get to work with some of the top family law firms in the country. And I just think, as a general practitioner, I don't think that I would have been able to accelerate that quickly in a general practice, working with that level of kind of companies and law firms. It's also given me opportunities to speak at conferences on my specialism. I think if you're general, it is harder to pick a topic to say to the CIOT, for example, I'd like to speak on this. They'll potentially come back and say, okay, what's your experience in that? And so you want to have something that really is, I guess, well, that gives you a bit more gravity when you're going into speaking and writing articles. So for me, I wouldn't go back and do it differently. I'm really happy that I've chosen a specialism that I really enjoy working in.
What do you think when people then say that specialising rather than being general is like a bad idea? Have you got kind of any general go-tos of what you would say to come back at that?
I think that it's firstly, everybody can make their own choices. Yeah. And if being a generalist is absolutely do or die for somebody, then of course go for it and do that. I think that for me, being a specialist, one of the immediate comments that you get is, oh, you only have a really small part of the market, you're cutting out your potential client base. Instead of having all these clients, you've only got a small portion that you can even pitch your work to. But I don't need loads and loads and loads and loads of clients. You know, we don't need, if you're a generalist, you're still not going to work with the entire population. You just have to figure out how many clients do you want to get to whatever your financial goal is. And I think you're more likely to win work if you're able to be really specific. You know, if you understand the problems that your clients are having and you've invested time in understanding those problems and how to solve them and how to deliver the best advice, then it's going to be easier. Even if you are pitching at a smaller pool of work, it's going to be easier to win that because you've invested time in thinking about how to best work with them and how to use the language that they use, respond in the turnaround times that they like. I think that I think it makes it easier. I think it makes working and pitching your services and delivering your work easier if you're working within a specialism. So I would encourage people to consider it, certainly if they're thinking about specialism v generalist.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think if you kind of try and target a pool that's too big, you end up not being able to get to anyone because it's just so generic that no one feels like it's relatable to them. So yeah, having that specialism removes that risk, I suppose, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And you've kind of touched upon some of the cons of specialising in terms of what other people would say. Have you got any other that you think come to mind that is a con compared to being more of a generalist?
I think that when you specialise, I guess you are at risk of there being a law change that will impact the advice that you deliver or could make your services completely redundant. And I think that is potentially a risk. But if you are really invested in a specialism, hopefully you would see that coming and it wouldn't catch you completely off guard. I think that you might want a bit more. So what could it do? Okay, so let's say that I'm just doing tax on divorce, and then I decide right now I want to go and work for one of the big four. One con could be that the big four say, okay, well, actually you haven't got enough general experience for you to come on board. But then I think the counter argument to that is, no, I don't have the general experience, but I probably have, you know, a huge amount of very specific experience in one area. And there's always going to be lots of people that have generalist knowledge. And again, you're going to be competing against them for jobs. So I think you've just got to be confident if you go for it to stick within your specialism and just realize that that's going to be your strength, even in areas where it might also be a little bit of a weakness if you're competing for roles. Yeah,
no, I agree. And some people might be annoyed at me for saying this, but I do think learning the tax knowledge is the easy part. I think kind of understanding and learning the empathy that you need to have with clients and speaking their language and the soft skills that come with all those things, I think are much harder to learn than the actual tax rules of something. So I think,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I do imagine that if for example, their specialism did get kind of deleted because of a law change, then they could easily pick up a new one, I imagine. So I think there is ways around that, isn't there? So people probably shouldn't be too worried about that. Obviously, it would be a pain if it happens, but there's ways to get around it, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you feel like your specialism has brought you any opportunities that you wouldn't have had if you weren't specialists, in terms of maybe, I don't know, speeches with the CIOT or being asked to write news articles, things along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. For articles, it's been really helpful because I'm focused on what I'm writing about, or I'm focused on a very specific area. Then when I pitch my articles, they have a very specific theme. They all seem to have a very similar theme. But even within tax on divorce, I've written about the changes to the main home relief, but I've also written about economic abuse. I've written about the pitfalls of mental health issues because sometimes, of course, if you're going through divorce, people will experience, some people experience a decline in their mental health during that process. So what is the impact of that when you have penalties and when you fail to file your tax returns? So even in that very small niche, you can, really tease out some really interesting areas. And I've also been involved in government consultations. There was a recent consultation on capital gains tax, and I, submitted some information there around the CGT implications of getting divorced. So yeah, it's definitely allowed me to exist, I think, in a space that would have either I never would have got to, or B, it would have taken many, many, many years as a generalist to have got to that place. Because people like to say it's easy for editors and people who create events to say, right, we're going to go with this person because they're an expert in this and they're going to talk on that, and then they'll find other people who are other experts in what they're in, and then the conference or the magazine has written itself. So for sure, I don't think I would have been able to speak on anything general before if I didn't specialise.
Yeah, I suppose now when people think of tax on divorce, I imagine you're the name that comes to their mind first for a lot of them, particularly since sounds like you were the first one to the market with it, and I still haven't heard of anyone else who specialises in it either.
I think that I think there were people that were doing it. Well, of course there were, because it wasn't that it didn't exist, but certainly I think I'm one of the more prominent people that says this is the only thing that I do. I will quite actively say no to other work, but sometimes when I see other people doing it, they do it alongside of other things, which is absolutely, fine, and that makes sense too. But insofar as only taking on this work, I don't think that there's a huge amount of us doing that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You're kind of the first one who's gone to market with it to put yourself out as a sheer expert on just that and nothing else. Yeah, I mean, just on that note, then, it sounds like you don't do any other work apart from tax on divorce. Then, but do you feel like niching or having a specialism prevents you from doing other work if you wanted to, or you're interested in it, or do you still think the opportunity is there for you to do it if you wanted to?
Well, I don't think. No, I do think it prevents me from taking on additional work, but I think that's okay, because there's no, like you said earlier, there's no way one person, or it's very challenging for one person to take on all the technical work in the world. And I think that there are other ways in which we can be involved within tax. If I find that what I'm doing at the moment just doesn't quite meet all of my needs, there are different bodies that you can sit on. You can engage with the CIOT on different levels. I think though, for example, my exam qualification was in IHT, and I will just touch IHT on the peripheries on a very specific type of order, which is given when couples get separated rather than divorced. But other than that, it's not, I won't go into in-depth IHT planning, because there are experts out there who do that, and clients are going to be better served by those people. Yeah.
So for you, the choice is to not do it. But I suppose if you could have almost two specialisms, because you have mentioned before, haven't you, that a few people do tax on divorce alongside other things. So it sounds like it's a choice, really. You can decide to just focus on one thing, or you can decide to focus on a couple.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I am I can't think of the word, but probably a purist when it comes to niching. I would really say, if you're going to niche, just niche in one area, because I think that is where you're going to be able to, if you're selling, quote unquote, to consumers, then you have to know what their issues are. And if you don't invest the time in finding that out, which I think is the most easy way to do that, is to niche, because then you've only got to look at one's pool of people and potential clients to consider, how can I best support them? And then you will end up providing, I think, a really good service, because you've thought about what they actually need, not what you're just trying to provide.
Yeah, I agree with that. I suppose just from a slightly different perspective then. So for me, at least, working in employment tax in the recruitment sector, we do a lot of what we like to call due diligence on the labour supply chain. So what we get in the recruitment sector sometimes is really long supply chains that have a worker engaged at the bottom of it and supplied all the way through. So that's a lot of the work that we do, and that's where we can really target ourselves and talk very clearly and specifically to recruitment sector clients. But then once we've got them on board as a client, we can talk to them about other employment taxes, things that might affect them as well. So it does actually help us having that one niche, doing these due diligences, but then it opens up the other doors for the more general employment tax work as well. We don't go any wider than that within our team, but I think it's nice, because then 90% of the work is all this due diligence work, and then the other 10% is a bit of a variety. And I personally like that, because it gives more variety to the job. I think I personally would get a bit bored if I only did the same thing day in and day out, but I think that's probably down to the individual to decide whether or not that would be the right thing for them, or whether or not they prefer to have a bit more variety in it, by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
I do think specialising gives people a lot of worry and maybe anxiety early in their career. I know I felt like that personally, because I kind of fell into employment tax a bit like how you fell into tax on divorce, by noticing that there was a gap there. My first tax job just so happened to be in employment taxes, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to work in VAT or corporation tax, because it looked like there was more opportunities out there for corporation tax, for example. And so I actually kind of kept asking myself these same questions through my head time and time again, and couldn't really come to a good answer on it. I mean, in terms of people who might be in a similar situation, have you got any kind of advice you think about how they can go about either choosing their niche, or maybe being satisfied that the niche that they're currently working in is good for their career rather than a negative?
Yeah, I think that I think there's definitely a piece around deciding what for the next like 5 years or 10 years, or what do I want my life to look like? What does success look like to me? And what do the things that I want to be involved in? So for me personally, I've always wanted to work in policy, not now, but in the future. So specialising in how the taxation of the family as a unit and what happens when that family is broken down, and should we be taxing couples or individuals? I can look at all of that policy stuff alongside tax on divorce, so it met that criteria for me. I think you can look at policy really easily actually if you're in a specialist area, because you're looking at the tax legislation regularly. So I think, does it meet what you're looking for? And I know that there are people that will work specifically, in the school hours, in school term times, or they'll work with schools, doing their sort of taxes and their accounts, or with charities, and that might meet so many of your needs that then outside of that you're only trying to fulfill a couple of different ones from a work perspective. But once you've done some research and established, is there enough of a client base here for me to be successful? Do I understand this industry, and also do I like the people that I'm potentially going to be working with over the next few years? That should give them a grounding of feeling comfortable that they are on the right track. And to your point earlier, all those skills are transferable. So if you pick a niche and after a few years you think, oh, I'm not convinced about this, the fact that if you can pick a niche and get writing experience, speaking experience, sat on different bodies, working within different organizations, like public organizations, then that is going to be fantastic. And you've proven you can do it once. And so it's like a serial entrepreneur, there's nothing stopping you then picking another niche and doing it again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We kind of had a bit more of a focus on maybe having your own business, but this equally applies, doesn't it, to just being employed if that's the route you want to go down instead?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was at PwC, we worked with one client, and we did all of their arrival briefings. So I was in expat tax, so we talked about tax when they came into the UK, when they left the UK, and I enjoyed them so much. And I was like, right, I think this is predominantly what I want to do. So I just went about trying to get myself trained, got signed off at quite junior level, trained up other people to do the same briefings, introduced feedback on those briefings so we could see how we were performing, change you can absolutely do this in any area. And then it meant that when other clients came to PwC and were like, oh, we want arrival briefings, the partners of those teams would come to me and say, okay, well, we know that you helped with this process. Obviously I didn't do it all myself, but I just decided that that's really where I'd like to be, because it was fun and it was interesting. And then it gives you that opportunity, because then the partner was, okay, well, can you help us on this, or can you give us some feedback on that, or can you basically come and implement it for this client? And none of that would have been possible if I hadn't decided that I was just going to try and work really hard and predominantly make those briefings my niche, I guess, for the time that I was there. Yeah.
So that made you even stand out just within PwC back then, didn't it? Because the partners knew you as the go-to person for that. And I imagine that helped your progression and development whilst you worked there as well.
Yeah, I definitely didn't think of it as niching at the time. In fact, I haven't thought about it as niching until just now. But yeah, that's definitely what it was. And it did make it easy for me to stand out, and easy. And of course, potentially are there opportunities that I missed out on because I was just doing the briefings? Yeah, maybe. But there was also lots of stuff that I did get, and it suited me because I really like going out and meeting clients. And that wasn't in my team. That we didn't meet clients that often unless we were doing these briefings. So it was really fun.
Yeah. So you made that choice anyway, and that was what was right for you at the time. And other people who are listening as well can do the exact same thing, can't they? They can make a choice to either specialise in something or not, and figure out whether it's the right thing for them to do. So that's all great stuff in relation to that. Then I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. If you are, you can make sure that you never miss out on any future episodes which will benefit you and your tax career by subscribing or signing up to email notifications by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. Episodes are released bi-weekly, and they're always aimed at helping you and other tax professionals to progress, develop and improve your careers. You can also get some further help in deciding where you'd like to specialise from Lesson 1, which is called Visualise Your Ideal Job, of my free course. Lesson 1 will help you think about what specialisms will suit you, and the overall course is aimed at helping you to progress, develop and improve your career at a pace set by you rather than others. You can sign up by heading on over to the show notes of this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com TTPP23, which just stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast, episode 23. Do you think if you had your general practice then that you would still be, I suppose, a live business? Do you think it would have been more difficult to continue that, to get it to a point where you are now? And do you think the niche has really helped you to build it to a better place than what it would have been otherwise?
Yeah, I think if I don't, so even when I was doing general practice work, I did predominantly work with contractors, IT contractors mainly, actually, just because they were the ones who were referred, so that was quite nice. But I think that I would have really struggled because this is more to do with running your own business than being an employee, but it is really difficult to market yourself to everybody and to say everybody should come and work with me. And because some industries work better than others, and some are going to enjoy working with you than others, so that would have been a real struggle. I probably would have ended up niching just potentially in something else if I hadn't have chosen this. I think I would have just found it's too big of a market, and there's so many competitors. I mean, the other thing we haven't touched on is I don't have that many competitors. I mean, if you Google tax on divorce, I'm going to be on the first page of Google that comes up, because whereas if you Google general tax advice, it's going to be so hard to get yourself to the top of that page, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. I completely agree with all of that. Really agree. So have you got kind of any final words for anyone who may be thinking about what niche they might be choosing, or whether or not niching is the right thing for them? Have you got any final words of wisdom?
So I don't know if
you want to call it that.
No, I don't. I definitely don't. Well, I put some notes down of just how you might choose a niche. And one thing that I think is really important is that whatever we have going on in our own lives as individuals, if you can bring a tax lens to it, I think you're going to have a really interesting perspective on whatever that may be. So there's some people that niche specifically in tax in football, or tax for entertainers, tax for sports professionals. But then there's also people will write articles in lots of different magazines. I can't think of, your niche magazines, so yachts and capital allowances on these sorts of things. So if you have an interest, not that divorce is my interest, but if you do have an interest and you are studying and you are learning about tax, you can think about, okay, well, how does tax interact with this specific industry? And is there anything there that's really interesting that potentially people don't know? Because tax, I think, is really interesting. And I think a lot of people, if you tell them you're a tax advisor, they usually have lots of questions that are very specific to them, but that can apply across a whole range of different industries. So I just think about what you're interested in and see if you can place that, your sort of tax expertise on top of that.
Yeah, that's a really good thought, actually, because I imagine most people would start with the tax and then try and fit an industry into it. But I suppose you're saying to come from the other angle is find the industry or the interest and then try and apply tax to that. Yeah,
absolutely. And because it could just be, I've got tax friends that live in Belgium, they live in France, they live in Italy, and some of them do tax writing, but they've picked what they find interesting and then they've applied tax to it, and then they've had a really successful and interesting career because they've already lent towards something that is of interest to them. So I would really try and do that as a starting point, because you just never know where you're going to end up.
Yeah, and that's a really good point as well, actually, because if you're working in an area that you don't find interesting, that you don't enjoy, I suppose it's easy for you to burn out and not want to do the work as often. So making sure you're interested in it, I think is key, really. If you want to have an enjoyable and nice career, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And also who you're going to be working with. When I like working with lawyers because I'm very corporate. I like that corporate environment, but I have colleagues that work in tech, and it's, from my understanding, it's much more chatty in emails, and everybody's very casual, and that's what they like. They like to be in that environment, and that wouldn't suit me because I like boundaries. I like everything to be really clear, and so you can also have a mind to that of like, well, what kind of industries do I think I'd like to work with, and what hours do I like working, and what other industries work those similar hours as well.
Yeah, so it almost sounds like you can brainstorm or have a brain dump of all the things that you know that you like and that you want out of your job, and then try and fit a specialism into that meets all your needs. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely.
I suppose that there is going to be one out there that meets those needs that you want. So it's just about finding it, isn't it? Which I imagine isn't necessarily an easy task, but doable if you really set your mind to it.
Definitely. I think if you're an employee, you'll probably have opportunities that you'll be able to see, okay, maybe I'll be a bit more interested in that than something else. You can only really specialize in something that your firm has available to them. But even if your specialism becomes, right, I'm going to become a really good presenter. I want to be the person that when we present to clients that I'm in that room, or I want to be good at taking all the complex legislation and writing our summary emails that goes out to clients. And then you become known as somebody that can take complex information and present it as clear information. You know, it doesn't even have to be super complex tax to begin with. It can just be any areas that you just want to get really well known for, and once you're then seen and acknowledged in that employment place, then you can kind of shift it a little bit more and then think, right, now how can I amend this and shift this so that it's meeting more of what I want.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for people then who are thinking about their niche, then do you think there's such thing as being too niche or too specialized? Do you think that could be, or does that exist, do you think, or do you think you can never be too niche?
I don't know. I guess it depends how far you want to take it. Could you be too niche? I guess yes. I guess you could be if I did tax on divorce, but only for I don't know, French people that were living in the UK between 2010 to 2020. But otherwise, I think it's hard to become too niche, because like I was saying earlier, even within tax on divorce, there's a whole host of different things that I will do within that area. I just know what work I won't take on. And I think if you'll know, I think, if you're too niche. And the reason that you'll know, or one of the tests will be that if clients start if say 90% of your clients are asking you to do something that you think falls outside of your niche, then the chances are you're not able to fulfill their needs by that very narrow niche that you've solved. So you need to still be able to fulfill all of those clients' needs within that niche before passing them on to a different advisor or a different professional. So if you can't meet what they're looking for, then the chances are it's possibly too niche.
That's a really good thought. And actually, did you kind of go through that process then when you were, I suppose, deciding what work you would take on specialising in tax on divorce?
I'm not sure how much. I wasn't worried about being too niche. It was more other people telling me that I was being too niche, that I wouldn't win the work. I think that because I was working, I did a lot of research on the industry. I used that research when kind of cultivating what work I would and wouldn't take on, and that really helped me in the process. So I didn't end up making it too narrow. I possibly struggled in the first year to describe what I did, and I did still have lawyers being like, oh, do you do this as well? And I was like, oh yeah, I definitely do that. And I just hadn't been very clear about all of the different work I did within that tax on divorce niche. So I really struggled with just, I think, articulating it. But I think that takes time, doesn't it?
Yeah. Is that an area then that you would recommend people spend some time thinking about then, to be able to clearly explain it to other people?
Yeah, clearly explain it to other people, and also to be able to, first of all, can they explain it to themselves? And then if they can explain it to themselves, can they explain it to other people in a way that then that person knows, what is it that what problem are you going to solve for me? And at what point do I pay you in that process? So that you're able to get clear on that.
How, maybe this is going to throw you off a bit, but do you think there's like a maximum amount of time you have that you can describe what you're doing before you lose someone's interest, or they end up not listening fully? Do you think you have like a set amount of time to get it over to them?
I don't think it's long. I think you've probably got about a minute and a half to be able to succinctly describe what you do. And of course, if you've done it well enough in that minute and a half, they'll ask you some follow-up questions, and then that's okay. But I think you want to be able to, like, I know what you do now, but I didn't know before, because you were able to describe it earlier on in the podcast. So yeah, something as succinct and short as that is hopefully be a good starting point. Yeah,
it would be. This is where I'll go back and time how long both of our explanations were. See if it's within a minute and a half. I think it'll be useful as well, if you don't mind, Sophia, is I suppose for people who are thinking about taking the leap from being employed to setting up their own business, how should they go about that to give them like a good chance of, I suppose, being successful in doing that?
One of the elephants in the room is obviously to make sure they're going to be financially stable. So thinking about how many months worth of rent or mortgage or whatever you need in the bank before you're able to take that step, so that you're not panicking. And then I think just having a roadmap of, what do I want this business to look like? Who are my clients going to be? What are the services I'm going to provide? And I think there was a concept that I've learned about recently, which is called like a minimum viable product, which is actually a tech term, I think. But I think it works quite well when you're starting up your business. And so it's just thinking, okay, well, what's the one thing I need to be able to ready to go straight away the minute that my business opens its doors? So is that tax returns, company accounts, whatever? And do I have the software ready to do that? And then you can start with those smaller products before you build up. And it's great to have all these big ideas of, I want to be doing these 50-page reports or working, on these huge mergers. But if you start with something, so again, I think I'm saying start niche, but even if your practice isn't niche, pick a product that you can deliver really, really well over and over again, which would be your minimum viable product. And then once you've got enough clients or you've got enough revenue from doing that, then you can start to expand your business.
Yeah. So, and then in terms of trying to, I suppose, get your first clients, then I imagine a lot of people would start with trying to do marketing in some form, whether that's on LinkedIn or sending out flyers, etc. Do you think there's a better approach than that to give yourself, I suppose, a high chance of getting your first few clients quicker?
So I think if you're a specialist, then I think you've got to reach out. You've got to go to where your clients are. So you've got to go to even if it's an online conference, go to the conferences, write articles for the places for the magazines and the industry publications that they're going to be reading. And then if it's generalist, I think don't be afraid to kind of talk to the people that talk to the people that are in your network. So if you're not British, for example, and then lots of other people who are French, for example, go and talk to them and say, this is what I'm doing. I'm setting up an accountancy business. I'm a parent, so I'm on a parents WhatsApp group. So I sent them all a message when I first set up, just to say, this is what I'm doing now. If anyone wants to have a coffee with me and chat it over, let me know. But I think LinkedIn is a hard place to win business if you go in at it cold, to be honest. So I would start with like the low hanging fruit, the people that you already know, and be really honest with people. Email your contacts and say that I've set this up. If you know anyone that you think would be clear, I'm doing tax returns for this much money or whatever it is that you're doing. Do you know anyone that might be interested? I'd really appreciate a referral. I would start there. I think that's going to produce more results. It can be hard to just go straight in on LinkedIn and get some traction straight away.
Yeah, no, I do completely agree with that. I think starting with the people you got more of a chance of getting something out of it. But I feel like a lot of people would find getting their first clients and winning their first clients the most difficult thing, and they probably wouldn't know where to start. And I think people would probably naturally fall into a marketing camp to go about it. But from what you said and from what I've heard from other people, it's counterintuitive, but going and just messaging a few people where you feel like there's a higher chance of something converting is better than, say, sending a letter out to 500 people who maybe 2 of them open it, and then it literally stops there, because that's the chance. That's what's going to happen in reality, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And people work with people, and we know that. So definitely go with the people that you already know, and just try and make those connections. And I think if you've also thought it through about the clients that you want and the business that you're going to be doing, it should make it easier and clearer for you to describe what it is you're doing when you then share that information with them.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, everything you're saying is everything that I've experienced. I know I haven't set up my own business like you have, but just in terms of being a specialist in the recruitment industry for employment taxes, everything you're saying is exactly what I've experienced. So it's good to know that it's not just a one-off, and hopefully you'll instill confidence in the listeners today as well, that it really does work, and this is a good way to go about it. I suppose just to round off the episode, then, it doesn't have to be in relation to niching or having your own business, but what would you say is the best piece of career advice that you've been given in relation to your tax career?
I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I like it, so I'll just say it again. I think that the best bit of advice that I've had is to define what success is to you, so that when you're on your journey, you're not going to get distracted by what everybody else is doing, or fiscal goals, or being the youngest person to make manager, or being the youngest person on the team, or the first person to do X, Y, and Z. If success is, I don't know, writing something or working 3 days a week and having extra time to work on your other projects, then you're going to be able to easily realize when you've become successful, because otherwise you're just constantly chasing this thing that it's so hard, and it's so easy to fall into this trap of I'm not where I need to be, therefore I'm not successful, therefore I can't take my foot off the pedal. And actually, if you've thought about it beforehand of, oh, I know that success looks like this to me, then I think it's easier to feel kind of more content as you go along.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's something that I try and say a lot, actually, is if you have a clear goal of where you want to go to, it's much easier to get there. Whereas if you don't have an idea, you could be wasting time in places that you don't need to be. And as you've just mentioned, you don't even know when you've got to the place you want to be. Yeah, and also without a goal, you could get to somewhere where you end up that you don't like. You realise you don't like it once you get there. So yeah, I think that's a really good tip for people, is to think about where they want to be first, so then they know that they're going to be happy once they actually get there.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that's all really good information and food for thought for people today there, Sophia. So really thank you for that. And it was really nice to have you on. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I know, I really appreciate it. And I would just say, if anyone really is interested in niching, and you can cut this out, but the book, The Go-To Expert by Heather Townsend, is so good. It has so many exercises on how to pick a niche. So if it's something that you're really looking for, I would suggest reading that book. It's fantastic.
Excellent. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for people as well. And if people want to find out a bit more about you, is there anywhere in particular that they can go, website or LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Sofia Thomas, and then my website is thomasconsulting.co.uk.
Lovely. I'll put a link to both of those in the show notes for people as well then. You can find more about Sofia, a link to the book she mentioned, The Go-To Expert by Heather Townsend, as well as sign up to the free course which will help you in choosing your specialism, in the show notes to this episode. The show notes can be found at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP23. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you never miss out on any future episodes which will benefit you and your tax career by subscribing or signing up to email notifications. This can be done by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. Episodes are released bi-weekly, and they're always created with the aim of helping you and other tax professionals to progress, develop and improve your careers. But that's it for this episode. I hope you found it useful and have taken away some useful points which will help you progress and develop your tax career. Until next time.